Good afternoon. It is Sunday, July 28th, 2013, here in Sarasota, Florida. And today I'd like to talk about a particular episode from The West Wing. I just finished watching episode 9 from season 1. And this is when Jed Bartlett was selecting his first Supreme Court justice, nominating his first Supreme Court justice. And so many things were going through my mind as I sat and took notes from this episode. Because as some may or may not remember, some of my early podcasts back from April were on the West Wing. Because at that time, I had just finished watching the entire series from season 1 all the way through for the first time ever, because I had never seen season 6 or season 7. And it was the first time I had watched any of these episodes since they originally aired, beginning back in 1999. Well, I found myself gravitating to the West Wing yet again, because this time I wanted to take notes. Not only are watching some of my favorite TV programs right now serving as a little break from my work and kind of social for me, because my world is still pretty isolated right now, but it's very much a part of my work. Integrating our mainstream world, things that so many people are aware of. Now, I know The West Wing as a TV show is probably a little bit more, the audience is a little bit less diverse than, say, the audience that watched Lost, which is another show that I will be talking about, as well as Dexter, as well as Breaking Bad, United States of Terror, Northern Exposure, and Grey's Anatomy. Those are sort of the top shows that I think have tremendous relativity and are applicable to a lot of the work that I'm doing. And I think it's going to appeal to a certain audience to be able to integrate these shows with the work that I'm doing. So, in general, what did this episode remind me of? Well, at the top of the list has to be what the entire series reminds me of or makes me contemplate, and that is our present political system. It is something that I will be talking very much about and from many different angles. And why? Because it is the pinnacle of the male energy that sort of defines this paradigm of fear. Okay? So the big three, religion, politics, and money. This is me really beginning to start to talk about these things very non-biasedly, but very honestly with logic of what exists. And what I mean by that is, I always say, people know that one of my favorite things here is no judgment, no judgment. No judgment doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. Okay? And I've said in many other postings, in either my written blogs or in some videos, that I will always call out things that are operating from the paradigm of fear versus the new game, right? What I reference as the new game, which is the paradigm of love that we are shifting into in this global awakening that is really taking place. And again, on the spectrum, you're going to have people fully acknowledging this awakening and people that are fully not able to see it, and everybody in between. But this awakening, I've also told you, is the perspective that resonates as true to me. One of the perspectives is the return of the divine feminine and the need, very big need, for massive amounts of feminine energy to kind of get a chance to even out the reality that faces our world. Okay? So if you can follow me here, the West Wing is it's the pinnacle of male energy. Females are still highly statistically not at all equally represented, although it is getting better. And when you compare us to other industrialized countries, it's, again, you've got many other countries that have, female presidents or have had female presidents versus here where we still have not had that. Of course, Hillary Clinton got the closest most recently, but that still is not a reality that we've had in this country yet. And not to say that a female president would necessarily be able to run the country or would run the country any differently than a male would because of how strong and the momentum of this system. Now, as I start to share more and more my opinions of our present political system and my experiences with politics over the course of my life, the other thing I was reminded at the conclusion of this episode, when they announced Mendoza as the nominee and he comes out of the president's office, the emotion, it's just unbelievable. The emotion within me as I watch it. I mean, this old system deserves absolute respect. Talking and criticizing it is not the same as disrespecting it. I never ever will mean disrespect, even though my belief is that the behaviors of what has become acceptable in our political arena has very much disrespected what the founding fathers intended when they set out on this great experiment we call America 200 plus years ago. So all of these things are all these things are going through my head, right, as I'm watching the episode, and then the specific subject matter that was being discussed. So in it, the original, or the guy, their first choice for the Supreme Court justice, had written this paper 30 years back when he was clerking that was basically saying or admitting or talking about how he was not supportive of privacy that was not explicitly stated in the Bill of Rights. For example, in the privacy in the Fifth Amendment, where you are guaranteed the right to not incriminate yourself. The privacy stated, I think, in the Second Amendment, where soldiers are not allowed to be stationed in homes of citizens. And the Fourth Amendment, where, I can't remember what the Fourth Amendment was, but there's a specific privacy also identified in the Fourth Amendment. So he's obviously in support of the ones that are very clearly noted as such in the Constitution, but other such privacies that aren't specifically noted, he's not, this particular judge is not, in this paper, presenting himself as somebody that would defend as a judge these other privacies. And so as you can imagine, that's a pretty big concern. So they bring him in, and immediately, because I've only seen this episode, once probably 15 years ago when it first aired, and once a few months ago, so not enough to really remember all the details. So before it gets to the end where they actually interrogate him in an unbelievable scene with Sam's character debating this issue of privacy with this, very accomplished judge, on the surface of punishing this guy for a belief, for a paper he wrote and a belief that he held 25 plus years in the past, my first initial reaction was, see, right there. There's yet another example of what's wrong with politics and what's wrong with so much of the systems of our present day right now. We do not, two things of that, two things. One, we hold on to people's past. And we never give anybody the benefit of the doubt that they've changed or that they're able to change, and you never let people forget their past. And that right there is just plain ridiculous. It's unfair, and it's not at all part of this new game going forward that I speak of. Now, I know that's not terribly clear right now, and I'm not going to go into it further in this podcast. But that's the first thing, right? Because almost in defense of this guy, right, is absolutely in defense of this guy. I'm like, come on, he's going to be punished for something he wrote 25 years ago? Isn't the whole point of growing as human beings to give ourselves space to take in new information and to change our opinions when presented with new information? That's why in the game of politics, when I was still following it up until 5 years ago, the whole flip-flopping thing, how I just remember John Kerry in particular was attacked for flip-flopping. I don't remember all the specifics, I just remember the silly phrase. And at that point, I don't think it affected me nearly as much as it does now. Because if there's anything that I want from a candidate, although I don't participate in our political system anymore, it's the ability to take in new information and to change your mind. How else in the world does anybody grow? How does anything grow and change and become quote unquote better or more rounded, well-rounded, if we aren't given the space to do that. So I thought of that as this early part of the episode when this was revealed in the episode. And I also thought, as I think in every episode of The West Wing, because, hello, it's about politics, how all that matters is the appearance of everything. How is it going to appear? How can they sell it? What's the perception? That is more, and I know, believe me, I understand I'm talking about a fictional series here. But I've said before, Hollywood is a lot more real than I think people understand or are willing to admit. And Aaron Sorkin is brilliant. He's brilliant. He's a brilliant writer, and this series was so to the T of an imitation of the real West Wing that I know the security was super high on the set, and I want to say that even Secret Service were present. I mean, the security was super high because their set resembled the actual White House to that extent. And this guy, I guarantee you, this guy did his research. I guarantee you the things that he quotes, the statistics that he quotes and writes into these episodes are damn near accurate, if like 100% accurate, if not, really, really close to being accurate. So I was also reminded of the fact that, again, the bigger concern from at least some of the staff members was, how is this going to appear? So then later in the episode, they bring him in. They bring him in to speak with the president and with Toby and with Sam. And they have this discussion about privacy issues, which is fascinating because what Sorkin does is he brings in, it's very real world things. And one of the things that Sam quotes, because Toby is actually wanting to keep the guy, because basically after they discuss with him the issue, it becomes very clear that his position really hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed. And now the issue is between President Bartlett, Toby, and Sam in this case, is trying to make the call of, okay, now that we see that his position hasn't changed much in 25 years, how does this affect now him being our first choice? And Toby doesn't need to be convinced very much. But Sam points out to the president, he said, in the 20s and 30s, the biggest issue was the role of government in people's lives. In the 50s and 60s, the biggest issue in terms of court cases and things that would make it all the way to the Supreme Court were civil rights issues. And now, in the present day, which this is season 1, so it's 99, so he's talking about, he said in the next 2 decades, it's going to be issues of privacy. With the internet, with medical records, with whether or not you're gay, and he points out those 3 things in particular. And I'm just sitting there watching, and that is absolutely relevant to right now. So then that made me think of the thing that should scare all of us, which is the remarkable number, and I use scare kind of, I'm not one for this fear-based paradigm, but most of the people that are going to be listening to my work and tuning in, you are still very much living in the fear-based paradigm because 99% of America still is. There is a very, very, very small percentage still that are able to see how you can move from the fear-based paradigm into the love-based paradigm, which is entirely essentially what I'm trying to do with my work, is to provide these avenues and to open up people's minds, one, to see the need. And this is what I come back to, what should be fearful to all of us, is how remarkably small a percentage of our American population, whether they vote or not. We already know how small the percentage is that votes and that doesn't vote, or that actually votes, on the opposite of that, how large a percentage doesn't vote. And I put myself in that category. And again, I leave it open for whether or not I decide to change that, but I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future because I refuse to participate in a system that has grown so ludicrous, so ridiculous in how wasteful and how inefficient it has become, and how obvious It is, if anybody wants to open their eyes. I'm about creating something different. And it's no longer, I spent many years that made me miserable, focusing on all the parts of it that it was just shocking to me, right? All the parts that I couldn't believe, the injustice, all of this that I'm referencing. The fact that it is so blatantly obvious that it is I don't even want to say broken system. We've outgrown it. We've outgrown it because it is a system that largely is a male system. Again, that's not a judgment. That one's a fact. And the females that are a part of it are still playing the old boys game. And again, watch The West Wing, and yes, okay, fiction, but turn on your news, and it's the same macho ego-ness that goes on. It's just become way more about power and manipulating their positions of power. And there are few and fewer Americans that are even able to comprehend what in the hell is going on. In the episode I watched yesterday, there was a House Appropriations bill. I think that was 7,000 pages. It weighed 55 pounds and it was 7,000 pages. You think our media is presenting in a little 5-minute or even a 30-minute talking segment that's highlighting things that are only going to make the two sides of Democrats and Republicans fight? You think they're even getting anywhere close to what's contained in 7,000 pages? That's ignoring the fact of how ridiculous it is to think that anybody can read through 7,000 pages and be able to understand it. And that it's even, it's just, there's so many parts of that I'm not even going to waste any more time talking about a 7,000 page bill. And I don't even know how many different bills at any given time, I should know this as a former social science teacher, how many given bills at any time are in the process of becoming law. But the fact that one alone is 7,000 pages, and we've voted these people in. We have voted them in to serve in our best interests. And they're not about doing that. It's more about the perception and the power. And now I'm going to probably go off on a little bit of a tangent, and I'm going to let it go on the political system itself. Because how in the world do we in this country, with as many diverse ways of engaging in the world and living our lives, how is it still acceptable that there are only two parties? Well, why? Because the people that are in the system are never going to change the laws to change that. The same way campaign refinance will likely never happen in this existing system. Why? Same reason why. How are you going to have... I was just reading on somebody's Facebook page article written by Warren Buffett. And this was back, I think it was back a few years ago. And this is, I only glanced through it, so I'm probably not going to be able to quote it all correctly. But he was basically suggesting something about the financial, like how to aid... Or I think it might have been tied to the 2008 financial crisis or shortly thereafter. And Warren Buffett was basically suggesting that all of Congress get treated like the rest of us in terms of retirement and in terms of health care. And again, I'm not going to say that these are exact quotes of what exists, but I'm fairly certain that you only have to serve one term in Congress. One term. One term. In order to get lifelong medical benefits and retirement benefits that far, far surpass what we as average Americans get through our companies and on our own. Now, let me also say that when I was studying for my content area exam, when I was becoming a teacher, you have to pass, in my case, I had to pass a social studies exam in order to get certified to teach middle school through high school social studies. And when I was studying for that exam, I learned a fact that I did not know. I did not know that our founding fathers never, ever intended for politics to be a full-time career. And not surprising, they were brilliant, brilliant men. They were visionary. Yes, they were all men, which is, again, let me also not lose the opportunity to point that out again, why we must evolve to something beyond our present day systems, because it was only men in those continental congresses and doing all the work leading up to what our government is today. But they were brilliant, visionary men. And they saw then the inherent conflict of interest that would inevitably result if people were to pursue politics as a full-time career. And that is exactly what we see today. Politics was meant to be something that you served your country short term, and then you return to whatever your profession was. Because now, with the special interest groups and the corporations running our entire political system, and then that means that the political system is in bed with all of the biggest companies. And as I learned in my American Foreign Policy class that I took, it was an undergraduate class that I took while I was in grad school. Because while I was an undergrad, there were dozens of classes I wanted to take that I never took because it didn't fit into one of my degree programs. It didn't go towards my marketing major or my psychology major or my economics minor or my international business minor. So God forbid if I actually took something that I was interested in. Back when I got into grad school, I then took a number of undergraduate classes simultaneously just for the learning, and American Foreign Policy was one of them. And that is when I learned about the military-industrial complex and the big three between higher education, big business, and politics, and how people and how the tops of those people in those fields kind of scratch each other's back and they move from one to the other. And it is not, I used to tell my sixth graders, follow the money, follow the money, follow the money and the motives to understand what's really going on behind the scenes. But see, we're all wrapped up in hating one another and blaming one another and actually believing that two opinions, Democrat and Republican, two groups can represent all of the diversity of the however 320 million or however much our population is up to in this country. That two groups. And not only that, if you're a Democrat and you happen to believe something that a Republican believes, well, that's a no-no. And likewise, if you're a Republican that believes something a Democrat believes. You know, if you're got a sitting Democratic president and he gives the State of the Union and he makes a couple of comments that you're not even allowed, if you're a Democrat, to disagree or to, because everybody's, you know, everybody's got this blind support regardless of what their own personal opinions are. None of it is real. None of these guys and women are allowed to be as real as they would, I'm sure, as they would like to be because of the importance of perception. Now, I'm not saying throw perception completely out of the window. I think having that part of it keeps us intact a little bit, right? But to the extent that it is right now, it has become truly a game. And truly still a men's game. And it has become a game of a massive abuse of power. And there are less and less participants in this game. And that is very dangerous because our government is not, according to the Constitution, ever to have more power than the people it represents. And that is what exists at present. And many, many, many people out there think that they're in this 1%, that the Republican Party, I will say, tends to kind of gear their message towards, right? They gear it to the hey, the Republican Party is brilliant. Brilliant. That's why the Democrats, seriously, the Republican Party's got its three main issues, right? military, big business, and really abortion. Those are the three issues that they've got. And they have marketed it, and they've got it down. But first of all, let me just point out that, the hypocrisy that exists for people who are pro-life, but then will vote for a candidate who's pro-war. I don't understand that. You can't be for life in one situation and then against it in another. That's complete hypocrisy. And then they appeal to the rich, right? But the thing is that you got a lot of Americans who make a lot of money. They're in the smaller percentage. Anybody that's making six figures, you're in a small percentage. But, our government would have you believe that you're in that super small 1%. And the fact is that 1% is the 1%. And if you're making, even if you're making 150 grand, you're not in that 1%. And so when the time comes, believe me, there are very, very serious things. And this is a time where I'm going to be shining the light and talking about things that I won't necessarily spend a lot of time on going forward, or at least I hope not to. But it is important. My farm friends and the people that I met while here in Sarasota, I never knew anything about Monsanto or very... Listen, folks, the privatization of water and the owning of seeds for our food, those are very, very big issues. And they're very real, and they should concern every single one of us. Because if our government gets control of food and water, or if the powers that be, because remember, the government is a puppet. The government has become a puppet of special interest groups. That's just the plain fact. And if you can't see that, if you can't admit that, you're just not being real. You're not being real, and it has nothing to do. I told you, I don't identify as either one. I have opinions and beliefs that are on both sides. I understand the Republican side of things more so than ever before. And I will be speaking, I told you, I'm on everybody's team and nobody's team. So you might listen to something I share in one video or podcast or blog post and completely agree with me, and then you might listen to something and completely disagree with me. And all I ask, all I can do is ask that you keep your mind open. This is a time for real people. It is time for us, especially those of us that have the intellectual capacity to have these sorts of conversations. We owe it. We owe it to ourselves, and we definitely hold a greater responsibility for the growing number of Americans that don't have the intellectual capacity to have these conversations. We do. And I'm going to start them, and I can't get any more isolated than I am now. Nobody can avoid, nobody's going to be more afraid of what I'm willing to say and do than what already exists for me. And this is something very, very necessary. If we can't talk about the big three, if we can't have adult, grown-up conversations, logical conversations about religion, politics, and money, then nothing is ever going to change. And I'm not looking to stay in that world of highlighting what's not working. I'm about creating and focusing on the positive and focusing on the knowing that I now possess, that I now know that we can create something different. And I'm coming from a paradigm and a belief system rooted in win-win, rooted in cooperation, rooted in a belief in abundance, and rooted in Well, the knowing that we need a female perspective. We do need females more to put in their 2 cents of the political system and how they would do things differently. Because I don't claim to have all the answers. God, no. I've said before, this is the biggest thing that I think I've been trying to do, and why I've been so banging my head is because I want teammates. I want others who begin to recognize this power that we have, so that and that understand we have tremendous power to create something that is, I hesitate to say better, because again, I don't like to believe that there's better, just something it's certainly more fair. Certainly more fair. Because it is not a level playing field right now. And I'm not saying we are created equal, because we're not. None of us. We're all unique beings. But there is a massive abuse of power that's going on in our present day systems. And it's time for something new. And I will be sharing a lot more specific to the West Wing and utilizing the West Wing to kind of integrate. And, and again, I don't know where it will go, but that is what I felt today in watching this very, very powerful episode. And again, I want to conclude with just saying it deserves the utmost respect. What our founding fathers, what they were able to see and create, and the fact that it's lasted this long is amazing, and it deserves respect. And in doing that, in giving it its respect, I think we need to start having adult, honest, real conversations about the system that exists in front of us right now, and how we really can begin to create something a little bit more suitable to the massive, massive differences that exist in our world at present. So, thanks for listening. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Good afternoon. It is Sunday, July 28th, 2013, here in Sarasota, Florida. And today I'd like to talk about a particular episode from the West Wing. I just finished watching episode 9 from season 1. And this is when Jed Bartlett was selecting his first Supreme Court justice, nominating his first Supreme Court justice. And so many things were going through my mind as I sat and took notes from this episode. Because as some may or may not remember, some of my early podcasts back from April were on the West Wing. Because at that time, I had just finished watching the entire series from season 1 all the way through for the first time ever, because I had never seen season 6 or season 7. And it was the first time I had watched any of these episodes since they originally aired, beginning back in 1999. Well, I found myself gravitating to the West Wing yet again, because this time I wanted to take notes. Not only are watching some of my favorite TV programs right now serving as a little break from my work and kind of social for me, because my world is still pretty isolated right now, but it's very much a part of my work. Integrating our mainstream world, things that so many people are aware of. Now, I know The West Wing as a TV show is probably a little bit more, the audience is a little bit less diverse than, say, the audience that watched